On a Monday morning in March of 1968, a 22-year-old farmer named Danny Jarvis drove his Farmall H into the parking lot of Becker Equipment in Caddo County, Oklahoma. The tractor was making a sound that no tractor should make, a grinding, clanking death rattle that had started 3 days earlier and gotten worse with every hour of work. Danny had nursed it the 12 miles from his farm to the dealership, praying with every turn of the wheels that it would make it. It made it barely. Carl Becker, the owner of Becker Equipment, came out to meet him. Carl was 53 years old, had been selling farm equipment for 25 years, and had seen enough broken machinery to know a terminal case when he heard one. "That doesn't sound good, son." "No, sir, it doesn't." Carl listened for a moment, his head cocked like a doctor hearing a bad heartbeat. Then he shook his head. "Crankshaft, cracked or broken. You're not going anywhere on that tractor until it's fixed." Danny felt his stomach drop. The crankshaft was the heart of the engine. A cracked crankshaft meant the engine was dying. "How much to fix it?" Carl wiped his hands on a rag. "New crankshaft machining labor. You're looking at $800, give or take." $800. Danny had $23 in his pocket and maybe another 40 in the coffee can at home. $800 might as well have been 8 million. "I don't have that kind of money, Mr. Becker." "I know you don't, son. Nobody your age does." Carl's voice wasn't unkind, but it wasn't sympathetic either. "This was business. I can offer you another option. I'll buy the whole tractor for $200. Scrap value. You can put that toward something newer, something that works." Danny looked at the Farmall. The tractor his father had bought used in 1952. The tractor Danny had learned to drive on. The tractor that had worked their 160 acres for 16 years. $200, that's the best I can do. The engine's shot. Nobody's going to pay more for a dead tractor. "What if I could fix the crankshaft myself?" Carl laughed. Not a mean laugh exactly. More the laugh of a man who's heard something absurd. "Son, you can't fix a cracked crankshaft. That's precision machining. You'd need a machine shop, specialty tools, years of training. It's not something you do in your barn with a hammer and good intentions." "What about welding? Could I weld the crack?" The laugh got louder. "Weld a crankshaft?" Carl shook his head, still chuckling. "Look, I admire your spirit, I really do. But some things just can't be fixed. A cracked crankshaft is one of them. The stress, the heat, the precision required. A weld would never hold. You'd be wasting your time and your money." "How much would the welding rod cost?" Carl sighed. $5–10 for the materials, but you'd be throwing that money away. That weld won't last a month, maybe not even a week." Danny was quiet for a moment, then he nodded. "I'll take my chances." He climbed back onto the dying Farmall and drove it home, the grinding sound getting worse with every mile. Carl Becker watched him go, shaking his head. "That boy is going to learn an expensive lesson," he said to his mechanic. "Some things can't be fixed. Better to know that now than later." Let me tell you about Danny Jarvis. Because to understand what he did next, you need to understand who he was. Danny was born in 1946, the second son of Harold and Mary Jarvis. The Jarvis farm was 160 acres of Oklahoma red dirt. Not the best land, not the worst. Just honest ground that rewarded hard work and punished laziness. Harold Jarvis died in 1965 when Danny was 19. Heart attack, sudden and final, in the middle of spring planting. Danny's older brother Tom had already left for the oil fields in Texas. His younger sister Ellen was 14 and still in school. That left Danny. He took over the farm the same week he buried his father. No transition, no training, no choice. One day he was a farm kid helping out. The next day he was a farmer trying to keep 160 acres alive. But here's the thing about Danny Jarvis. He'd been paying attention, not just to farming, to everything. In high school, while other boys were playing football or chasing girls, Danny spent his free periods in the shop class. Mr. Patterson, the shop teacher, was a former Navy welder who'd worked on battleships during World War II. He taught welding like it was an art form. Welding isn't just about melting metal, Mr. Patterson would say. It's about understanding metal, how it moves when it heats, how it shrinks when it cools, how different metals behave differently. You master that and you can fix almost anything. Danny mastered it. By his senior year, he was doing work that impressed even Mr. Patterson. Complex joints, difficult angles, repairs that other students couldn't manage. He had the hands for it. Steady, patient, precise. You could make a living at this, Mr. Patterson told him once. Good welders are always in demand. I'm going to be a farmer, like my dad. Then you'll be a farmer who can weld. That's a powerful combination. Mr. Patterson was right. But Danny didn't realize how right until that March morning in 1968 when he stood in Carl Becker's parking lot with a dead tractor and $23 in his pocket. Let me tell you about the repair, because that's where Danny's legend began. He drove the Farmall into the barn and spent the rest of Monday getting the engine apart. It was slow, careful work. He'd never fully disassembled an engine before, and he couldn't afford to break anything else. By Tuesday morning, he had the crankshaft out and on his workbench. The crack was obvious once you knew where to look. A hairline fracture running across one of the main bearing journals. Exactly the kind of damage that Carl Becker had said couldn't be fixed. Danny studied the crack for a long time. He thought about what Mr. Patterson had taught him about metal, about stress, about heat distribution. He thought about how a crankshaft moves, spinning thousands of times per minute, absorbing the explosive force of the pistons, transferring that force to the transmission. A regular weld wouldn't work. Carl was right about that. The stress would crack it again within days, maybe hours. But what if it wasn't a regular weld? Danny went to town that afternoon and spent $12 at the hardware store. Specialty, welding rod, the kind rated for high-stress applications. Then he spent another $3 at the auto parts store for a grinding wheel and some precision files. $15 total. He worked through Tuesday night and all day Wednesday. First, he ground out the crack, widening it into a V-shape that would accept the weld better. Then he preheated the crankshaft slowly, carefully, raising the temperature of the entire piece so the weld wouldn't create stress fractures when it cooled. The welding itself took 4 hours. Slow, methodical passes, building up layer after layer of new metal. Danny worked with the patience Mr. Patterson had taught him. Never rushing, never forcing, letting the metal tell him what it needed. When the weld was done, he let the crankshaft cool slowly, wrapped in insulating blankets over the course of 12 hours. No rapid cooling that might create new cracks. No shortcuts that might undo all his work. Thursday morning, he ground and polished the weld until it was smooth, until you almost couldn't tell where the crack had been. Then he measured everything. The alignment, the balance, the roundness of the journals, using tools he'd borrowed from Mr. Patterson's shop. Perfect. Or as close to perfect as human hands could make it. He reassembled the engine Thursday night and Friday morning. By Friday afternoon, the Farmall was ready for a test. Danny climbed into the seat, said a prayer to whatever gods protect farmers and fools, and turned the key. The engine caught, ran, sounded good. He let it idle for an hour, listening for any sign of trouble. Nothing. He drove it around the barnyard, then out to the fields, then back. Nothing. The $15 weld was holding. News travels fast in small towns. By the following Monday, everyone in Caddo County knew that Danny Jarvis had welded his own crankshaft and that the repair had worked. Carl Becker drove out to the Jarvis farm to see for himself. He found Danny in the field plowing with the Farmall, the engine running smooth and strong. Carl stood at the edge of the field and watched for a few minutes, listening to the sound of an engine that shouldn't be working. When Danny reached the end of the row, he stopped the tractor and climbed down. "Mr. Becker," Danny, Carl looked at the Farmall, then at Danny, then back at the tractor. I heard you fixed it, welded the crankshaft. Yes, sir. Carl shook his head slowly. I've been in this business 25 years. I've never seen anyone weld a crankshaft and have it hold. There's a first time for everything. I suppose there is. Carl walked over and listened to the engine up close, his ear near the block, the way a doctor listens to a heartbeat. After a minute, he straightened up. Sounds good. I wouldn't have believed it if I wasn't hearing it myself. Thank you, sir. Carl looked at Danny with an expression that might have been respect, might have been irritation, might have been both. That weld won't last, you know. Might hold for a month, might hold for a year. But eventually the stress will crack it again. Danny just smiled. Then I'll weld it again. Carl laughed, a different laugh than the one at the dealership. This one had something else in it, something that sounded almost like admiration. You're a stubborn one, aren't you? My father always said that was my best quality. Carl turned to leave, then stopped. If you ever want a job, come see me. I could use someone who can fix things that can't be fixed. I've got a farm to run, Mr. Becker, but I appreciate the offer. Carl drove away, shaking his head. 18 years later, neither of them had to find out who was right. The weld held, not for a month, not for a year, for all of 1968, all of 1970. The Farmall worked the Jarvis field season after season, and Danny's $15 repair kept holding. Word spread. By 1970, other farmers started bringing Danny their unfixable equipment. A cracked transmission housing, a broken hydraulic cylinder, a snapped axle shaft. Things that dealers said couldn't be repaired, things that supposedly required expensive replacement parts. Danny fixed them, not always. Some things really were beyond repair. But more often than anyone expected, he had the skills. And he had something else. A willingness to try when others said it was impossible. He didn't charge much, couldn't really. These were his neighbors. A few dollars for materials, maybe a little extra for his time, enough to cover costs, not enough to get rich, but the work kept coming. By 1975, Danny had a reputation that extended beyond Caddo County. Farmers drove 50 miles, sometimes more, to bring him equipment that their local dealers had written off. Junkyard Danny, they called him, a nickname that had started as an insult and became a badge of honor. You need something fixed that can't be fixed, you take it to Junkyard Danny. Danny's barn became a workshop. He bought a proper welding setup, a lathe, a milling machine. All of it used, all of it repaired by his own hands. He kept farming his 160 acres, but the repair work became almost as important as the crops. And through it all, the Farmall kept running. The $15 weld kept holding. Carl Becker's story was going in the opposite direction. The 1970s were boom years for farming. High prices, easy credit, everyone expanding. Carl sold more tractors in the 70s than he had in the previous 2 decades combined. New machines rolled off his lot every week, financed on 5-year loans that farmers signed without reading the fine print. You've got to have the latest equipment, Carl would tell them. The new models are more efficient, more powerful, more everything. That old tractor is costing you money every day you keep it. The farmers listened. They traded in their paid-off machines for shiny new ones. They took on debt they couldn't really afford. They trusted Carl Becker because he'd been in the business for 30 years. What Carl didn't tell them, what Carl maybe didn't fully understand himself, was that the boom wouldn't last forever. The farm crisis hit in the early 1980s. Interest rates spiked. Commodity prices crashed. Land values collapsed. Suddenly, all those farmers who'd bought new tractors on credit found themselves owing more than they could pay. And suddenly, Carl Becker's dealership was in trouble. By 1983, Carl was repossessing more tractors than he was selling. His lot was full of equipment nobody could afford to buy. His bank was asking uncomfortable questions about his own loans. And out in the county, more and more farmers were taking their broken equipment to Junkyard Danny. Fix it, don't replace it. That became the motto of the 1980s farm crisis, and nobody fixed things like Danny Jarvis. Carl Becker's dealership closed in the spring of 1986. He couldn't make his payments, couldn't sell enough equipment, couldn't survive the crisis that was destroying farmers all over Oklahoma. The bank took the building, the inventory, everything. The foreclosure auction was held on a Saturday in April. Danny Jarvis was there. He stood at the back of the crowd and watched the auctioneer work through the inventory. Tractors sold for a fraction of their value. Tools went for pennies on the dollar. The building itself came up last. The building where Danny had been told 18 years earlier that his crankshaft couldn't be fixed. The building where Carl Becker had laughed at his $15 repair. The opening bid was $60,000. A few hands went up half-heartedly. 62, 65, 68. Danny raised his hand. 70,000. The other bidders looked at him. They knew who he was. Junkyard Danny. They knew he didn't have $70,000 any more than they did. But they also knew something else. They knew that Danny Jarvis had been saving money for 18 years while they'd been spending it. They knew that his repair business had been thriving while their farms had been failing. They knew that the man who'd refused to pay $800 for a crankshaft had been quietly building something all along. The bidding continued. Danny matched every offer. At $82,000, the other bidders dropped out. Sold to Danny Jarvis for $82,000. Danny walked to the front, shook hands with the auctioneer, and signed the paperwork. As he was signing, he felt a presence at his elbow. Carl Becker. The old man looked different than Danny remembered. Smaller, older, defeated. The confident dealer who'd laughed at a 22-year-old's impossible repair was gone. In his place was a 71-year-old man who'd lost everything. Danny, Mr. Becker. Carl looked at the building, his building once, and then at the man who just bought it. I suppose you're feeling pretty good right now. Danny considered the question. No, sir, I'm not. I remember what it was like standing in your parking lot with a broken tractor and $23 in my pocket. I remember feeling like everything was over. Danny shook his head. I don't wish that feeling on anyone, not even someone who laughed at me. Carl was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was thick. That Weld, the one I said wouldn't last a month, is it still holding? Danny smiled. 18 years and counting. 18 years. Carl laughed a sad, tired laugh. I've been wrong about a lot of things, Danny, but I think that was the biggest one. You weren't wrong about everything. You were right that a regular weld wouldn't hold. You were right that it was a precision job. You just didn't know that I had the skills to do it right. I should have at least given you a chance to try. You gave me something better, Mr. Becker. You gave me a reason to prove you wrong. Danny extended his hand. No hard feelings, I mean that. Carl shook it. What are you going to do with the building? What do you think? I'm going to fix things. Same as I've been doing for 18 years. Just now I'll have a proper shop to do it in. Carl nodded slowly. You need any help? I spent 30 years learning about tractors. Might as well be useful for something. Danny thought about it. The man who'd laughed at him offering to work for him. The man who'd said he couldn't, asking if he could help. Can you start Monday? Jarvis Repair opened in June of 1986, right in the middle of the farm crisis. And from the first day, it was busy. Farmers came from 3 counties with their broken equipment. The tractors and combines and trucks they couldn't afford to replace. Danny fixed what could be fixed, taught his customers how to maintain what he'd repaired, and charged prices that working people could afford. Carl Becker worked there too, for 5 years until he retired for good. He answered phones, helped with paperwork, and spent a lot of time in the shop watching Danny work. You know what I learned working here? Carl said one day, watching Danny weld a cracked engine block. What's that? I spent 30 years telling people they needed new equipment, convincing them that their old stuff was junk, that they'd be better off with something shiny and modern. Carl shook his head. I was wrong. Most of that old equipment just needed someone who cared enough to fix it right. It's not about old or new, Danny said, not looking up from his work. It's about understanding what you have, knowing how it works, treating it with respect. Like you did with that crankshaft. Danny smiled, like I did with that crankshaft. I still can't believe that Weld held. 18 years, 20 now. 20 years, Carl laughed. You know what, Danny? I'm glad you proved me wrong. Somebody needed to. The Farmall H ran until 1998. 30 years on a repair that was supposed to last a month. When it finally stopped running, it wasn't the crankshaft that failed. It was everything else. 30 years of Oklahoma dust and heat and work had simply worn the rest of the tractor out. Danny didn't scrap it. He parked it in the corner of the Jarvis repair shop, next to the front door where everyone who came in could see it. He put a sign on it. 1952 Farmall H crankshaft welded in 1968 for $15. They said it wouldn't last a month. It lasted 30 years. Never stop believing you can fix what others say is broken. The tractor became a local landmark. Farmers brought their kids to see it, told the story of Junkyard Danny and the $15 Weld. It became part of the county's folklore. The tractor that refused to die, fixed by the young man who refused to give up. Danny Jarvis ran the repair shop until 2008, when he finally retired at 72. His son Michael took over the business, trained by his father in the same skills that Danny had learned from Mr. Patterson 40 years earlier. What's the most important thing about fixing equipment? Michael asked once when he was still learning. Danny thought about it, believing it can be fixed. Most people give up before they start because someone tells them it's impossible. The first step is refusing to believe that. What's the second step? Danny smiled, learning the skills to prove them wrong. In 2012, the County Historical Society honored Danny with a ceremony at the repair shop. They unveiled a plaque next to the old Farmall. Danny stood in front of the crowd, embarrassed by the attention. I'm not much for speeches, he started. I'm better with a welding torch than with words. The crowd laughed. But I want to say something about that tractor behind me. In 1968, I was 22 years old, broke and scared. My father had died, my brother had left, and I had a farm to run with no money and no equipment that worked. When that crankshaft cracked, I thought it was over. He paused, looking at the Farmall. A man at the dealership told me I had two choices. Pay $800 I didn't have or give up. He said the crankshaft couldn't be fixed. He said I was wasting my time trying. He laughed when I said I'd weld it myself. Danny smiled. That laugh was the best gift he ever gave me because it made me angry, and that anger made me determined, and that determination made me succeed. He looked out at the crowd. Every one of you has been told something can't be done. Every one of you has been laughed at for trying anyway. Here's what I want you to remember. The people who laugh don't know what you know. They haven't seen what you've seen. They haven't worked as hard as you've worked. He pointed at the Farmall. That weld lasted 30 years. Not because I was smarter than the dealer. Not because I had better equipment. But because I refused to believe him when he said it couldn't be done. I looked at that cracked crankshaft and saw something fixable. He looked at it and saw scrap. The difference was in our eyes, not in the metal. Danny stepped back from the microphone. So the next time someone tells you something's impossible, remember this tractor. Remember the $15 weld. Remember that the only thing standing between you and success is someone else's opinion. And opinions can be wrong. Danny Jarvis died in 2019 at the age of 83. His gravestone reads, Danny Jarvis, 1946-019. He fixed what couldn't be fixed. Jarvis Repair is still operating today. still run by Michael, still fixing equipment that other shops say is beyond repair. The old Farmall still sits by the door, 30 years of welded history, a testament to stubbornness and skill. And somewhere in the files of the County Historical Society, there's a receipt dated March 1968, $15 in welding supplies, the most valuable investment Danny Jarvis ever made.